So I want to talk about three philosophies behind the Tower of Babel. In the shadow of the drama of the Great Flood, there's a mysterious and I would say an often overlooked story, the story of the Tower of Babel. The story is short, it's around 9 verses, but I think it's a story of great importance because it's the root of one of the most enduring conversations of all humanity in determining the nature of government. The story goes like this. There's a group of people who settle in a valley in the land of Shinar, in ancient Babylonia, modern day Iraq. In the large valley between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and the Torah tells us that at that time, all the people spoke only one language. In great companionship, they embark on the most daring building project ever attempted to build a city with a tower that will reach heaven and have all humanity settle there. Now, God is not happy about this project. So, what does God do? He confuses their languages, giving them each their own unique language and effectively foiling any cooperation. This led to infighting, to chaos, and they soon abandoned the project and they spread all over the planet. Each one formed their own civilization, their own culture, and their own language. This story has long intrigued scholars, has long intrigued historians, who have even gone so far as to attempt to locate the exact location of the Tower of Babel in Iraq. Now, what was the crime? Why is God so upset with the idea of an homogeneous, unified civilization? I don't see the problem. The Torah itself, although it tells us that the builders were dispersed, it doesn't say what became of the tower, but the Talmud authored in Babylonia in the 5th century, in the same region where the tower was built, does tell us about the fate of this gigantic tower. I want to go to the Talmud here. Give me a second. The Talmud is in Sanhedrin. It's on 109a, and it says the following. Rabbi Yochanan said, the tower, a third, which means the top third of the tower, was burnt. A third, the lowest third, was submerged in the earth, and a third remains intact. So a third, top third was burnt, the lowest third was submerged in the earth, and the middle third remains intact. The Midrash says something interesting. I want to bring up the Midrash here. I'm going to read it for you as well. It's in Bereshis Rabbah 38:8. This is what the Midrash says. Rabbi Chia, the son of Abba, said, this tower which they built, 1/3 of it was burnt, 1/3 of it sunk into the ground, and 1/3 of it still remains in existence. Let you think, I'm just translating it here, the remainder of the tower is small. Rabbi Huna said, in the name of Rabbi Adi, that if one ascends to the top of the remaining tower and looks down, the palm trees look like grasshoppers. So there's perspective for you. It's fascinating to note that at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, large evacuations were performed in the area of ancient Babylonia, in the territory actually between the Tigris and the Euphrates in Iraq. The city of Ur, which is the birthplace of Abraham, who was 48 years old when the tower was built, was uncovered. And archaeologists have discovered a very tall tower, which may have been the remnant of a Tower of Babel that the Talmud and the Midrash discuss. But what's the significance of the fact that 1/3 of a tower burned, 1/3 of the tower was buried, and 1/3 remained intact? Why did it happen that way? And why do the sages make a point of telling us this narrative? How do they even know this? And when does the Torah say this? So I think there's a far deeper message here. The Midrash explains three explanations for the sin of the Tower of Babel. The Midrash says the first explanation is the following. The purpose of the tower was to defeat God. The people built a tower upon which to ascend to the heavens and once and all to lay God to rest. To defeat God. The second interpretation is that the purpose of the tower was to create a totalitarian, like a homogeneous society with a single culture, a uniform vocabulary, an identical way of thinking, an equal distribution of wealth. And the Torah begins the narrative with these words. Now the entire earth was of one language and uniform words. And the Midrash says, what's in this person's hand belongs to the other person's hand, and what's in the other person's hand belongs to him as well. This was the first attempt at a socialist society. The third opinion, the Midrash says, the tower was a defense against a future flood. The people felt that by every so often, the sky would begin to fall and the flood would happen again. And the tower was intended to support the sky so that it wouldn't collapse again in the future. And their uniform words represented a uniform plan to protect themselves against nature's dangers. So three interpretations. Now, we'll understand the depth of the words of the sages about what happened to the three parts of the tower. The rabbis were addressing not only the physical properties of the tower, but also the three ideas which fueled it. One of these ideas was completely burnt and destroyed. The other idea was buried, but not destroyed. So every so often, depending on the tide, it's going to rear its head. And the third idea, motivating the tower to stand tall and proud to this very day. So the first motivation behind the tower, to fight God. This motivation viewed the creator as this pagan creature who can be appeased through human sacrifices, through all types of gifts, but can also be destroyed. And so in their ancient, primitive, and pagan minds, God was another bully who we can battle and annihilate. This perspective has been burned. I mean, whether you call yourself a believer or an agnostic, whether you love God or you have issues with God, no one feels today that they could build a tower to assassinate God. That third of a tower has been burnt. Literally, it's been deleted from society. And it's clear today that whether you believe or not, that we're dealing with a transcendental God, transcending time, transcending space, matter, beyond human properties. And this God cannot be killed through warfare. The second idea behind the tower is to create a society, a homogeneous society. And that idea has been submerged in the earth. But every so often it pops up. From Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire to Karl Marx and socialism, Soviet Union, to the People's Republic of China, and even some professors and activists. Many attempts have been made to silence the differences between people, both in thought and in societal structure and wealth. And even though the idea, I think, sounds beautiful and seems to answer a lot of the issues in our world, the conflicts in our world, it has failed time and time again. It's actually produced far more disaster and bloodshed than good because it defies human nature and it destroys human creativity. Churchill said it this way. He said, capitalism is the unequal distribution of wealth. Communism is the equal distribution of misery. We can never create ensuring unity by denying diversity. Diversity is sewn into the fabric of existence. Just like no two faces are alike, no two minds are alike. That's from the Mishnah. Just like no two faces are alike, no two minds are alike. The Tower of Babel, according to this interpretation, was not designed to rival God's existence, but to rival God's undefined reality, which expresses itself in the endless diversity of existence. The very radical, undefined unity of God, which gives birth to the endless diversity of creation. They wanted to build this totalitarian tribal civilization dedicated to the principles of nationalistic homogeneity. The people had to be one in all ways. And this is the essence of a fascist uniformity. God introduced a multiplicity of language, not to punish the people, but to fashion a world of individual diversity rather than the sameness. We celebrate the 390,000 different kinds of plants, the 10,000 species of birds, the 60,000 species of trees, the 5.5 million species of insects, 7,000 species of mammals, 34,000 species of fish, thousands of languages spoken. Each and every one of them make the world a diverse and a beautiful place. The miracle of creation is that unity in heaven creates diversity on earth. There are many things which unite us. Our single creator, God, our shared human aspirations, our shared human needs, feelings. We're all moved by a beautiful sunset, by the smile of a child. But there's also a lot that divides us. And that which divides us is as divine as that which unites us. People are not the same. And people are not supposed to be the same. Remember Esperanto? I know somebody who speaks Esperanto. Esperanto was this universal language of humanity. It was meant to unite the world through one language. No more Spanish, no more French, no more Russian, English, Hebrew, Bulgarian. Everyone was going to speak Esperanto. It was actually created by a Jew, this idealistic universal Jew. His name was Eliezer Ludwig Zamenhof. He did it in the beginning of the 19th century. He was from Bialystok, and he felt that Esperanto would cure anti-Semitism. As Gentiles would begin to understand Jews, ironically, all three of his children were murdered in the Holocaust. Different story. But he translated the Torah into Esperanto. And as of 1975, Esperanto was taught in 600 schools to 20,000 students every year. There were about 100 journals and 7,500 books written in Esperanto, including translations from 65 other languages. But it didn't do the trick. It's basically forgotten today. I mean, there's some people keep it going, but basically forgotten. People wanted their culture. People wanted their heritage. They wanted their language. The only thing that I think remains from this Zamenhof is a street in Tel Aviv that's named Eliezer Zamenhof Street. This aspect of a tower, the belief that we can destroy diversity and create superficial oneness, has been buried in the earth. But every so often, a person or a movement comes to try to revitalize it, to breathe a new life into a buried specimen, a failed philosophy. That's the second interpretation. Now let's go to the third. The third philosophy behind the Tower of Babel is that it still exists in full sight. This is the idea that we can build a tower to prevent another flood. Think of it this way. Noah stood in front of the ark for 120 years, warning that God was going to bring a flood. Noah was mocked. Finally, the flood came. Any thinking person should have concluded that there's a creator who runs the world and expects people to behave in a moral, kind way, that we are responsible to God and to the universe. Yet the people, the grandchildren of Noah, chose to blindly believe that the flood was just a natural disaster. And if it's only a fluke of nature, then there's no lesson to be learned from it. On the contrary, we can correct the problem, not by improving ourselves, but by properly constructing a support tower to prevent the sky from collapsing. That third philosophy, it still exists. That the laws of nature are random mistakes, that there's no consciousness behind them. This part of the tower still exists in full sight. We too, like the generation of the tower, often deny ourselves the opportunity of seeing the inner heartbeat of life, the rhythm behind the scientific laws, the music vibrating through the laws of nature, and the symmetry of physics. By taking the miracles around us and sending them into a science lab to be dissected as formulas, we make our lives and the world a little shallower, a little emptier. It also creates a hubris and dulls our sensitivity to moral responsibility. The fallacy exists to such an extent that, as the Medrash said before, one who ascends the tower sees palm trees as if they're grasshoppers. The miracle can be so great that it towers over the landscape like a palm tree. And naysayers will minimize it to the size of a grasshopper, attributing it to nature, to happenstance, not realizing that coincidence is God's way of choosing to remain anonymous. Remember a couple years ago, they were talking about the Homo Deus, that finally there was going to be a time when we as humans could assume the role of God. The scientists were talking about doubling the lifespan, completely getting rid of death. It's still a conversation sometimes. We knew it all. We could do it all. And then,
Mom, you want to
and then out of nowhere came a virus the size of 125 nanometers, and it crippled the planet. From politicians to scientists, everyone was in the dark, just as we were 4,000 years ago during the time of the Tower of Babel. Science and technology are great blessings, but they're tools. Innovations in physics do not guide us to become better people and to create a more decent world. Towers we must build, not to defeat heaven, to or replace heaven, but to create a fragment of heaven on planet Earth. So here's my thought. You can believe that the world is a result of a random Big Bang and was just one big cosmic mistake. Or you can believe that every blade of grass has been placed there by God and has a unique, although usually unfathomable, purpose to fulfill. You can choose to believe that you're stuck in your job because when you were a foolish sophomore in college, you randomly chose a course. Or you can say that there's a unique mission that you can accomplish in your workplace with your honesty, with your work ethic. You can influence your coworkers. You can choose to believe that you married your spouse because you were naive and you fell in love and you had no idea about real life. Or you can believe that your spouse completes your soul and together you can overcome any obstacle and you can build a beautiful life together. You can choose to believe that your personality is a natural result of your childhood, of your parents, of your gene pool, of your horoscope. You can believe that there's no such a thing as free choice, and all your decisions are predetermined by randomness, by fate. Or or you can choose to believe that there's a trace of God within you, a soul that is uncorrectable, unstoppable, a soul that is capable of true greatness. You can live in the Tower of Babel, or you can cleanse the doors of perception and live in a world of infinite possibility. And so for me, the Tower of Babel, the three ideas, burned, sunk underwater, and still exists. And that third idea that it still exists, our society still has a Tower of Babel. It's become more and more clear And it's amazing that this week's Torah portion is this week and not last week and not next week. It's this week. It's right now. Because there's so much of a Tower of Babel happening in our world right now. And it's our responsibility to learn from it, and to make that change. And Hashem should bless us by giving us the strength and the perseverance to be able to actually make that change and actually go against the Tower of Babels in our lives. With that, I wish you a beautiful Shabbat.